just wanna be with you. Just wanna be with you.
Giving to your local church should be easy, and with Tithely, it is. Just download the app and securely register your credit or debit card. You're done. Now you can give during church services or anywhere else. Use Tithely to give a one-time gift or set up recurring donations. It's that simple. It's fast, secure, and easy to use. Tithely, the simplest way to give to your local church.
Children of generations, of every nation, of kingdom come. So don't let your heart be troubled. Hold your head up high, don't fear no evil. Fix your eyes on this one truth. God is madly in love with you. So take courage, hold on, be strong. Remember where our help comes from. Oh, 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 oh.
Together, we are creating a new future for the Valley because of your generosity. Your financial support is being used to produce content and create a loving community that is bringing hope to hurting people during the COVID pandemic and quarantine. Your giving equips New Soul Rebecca with tools to provide access to our services and support for people who can only meet with us by phone. Because you give, the hungry are being fed, and we've launched a winter warmth campaign to protect people in the Valley from the cold this season. With your help, in 2021, we're not slowing down, but ramping up a campaign to expand our digital reach to help and inspire more kids, students, singles, families, and seniors. Your giving is making a difference in the community. 1 Timothy 6:17-19 says, "Don't be full of yourselves and obsessed with money, which is here today and gone tomorrow. Go after God, who piles on all the riches we could ever manage. Do good. Be rich in helping others. Be extravagantly generous. If you do that, you'll build a treasury that will last, gaining life that is truly life." We have quick and easy ways for you to give. Online, newsoulrebecca.com. By text BLESS to 94000. By app, download the Tithely app. Or by mail, New Soul Rebecca, P.O. Box 574, Rebecca, New Mexico 87560. To receive text updates from New Soul Rebecca, text Rebecca to 94000.
What are you believing God for? I heard this question in the church environments I grew up in. The church would gather together and a preacher would be praying for a sick person and would say to the audience, "Come on, believe with me. Let's fill this room with faith. Miracles will happen if you only believe." The music would swell and the voices of sincere believing people would be lifted in sincere prayer. I spent a lot of time trying to believe hard enough to do my part to create an atmosphere in a church meeting that would bring healing to people. I did my best to have the kind of faith that healed sickness, improved finances, and performed miracles, to really, truly believe. If simply believing was enough to make a difference, think about how much better our lives would be. If simply believing eating healthy and exercising was enough to keep you fit, imagine how fit you would be. If simply believing preparation in school was the way forward academically, imagine how much better your grades would be in school. Imagine how much better your finances and relationships would be if simply believing were enough. Jesus knew this. He knew that when we believe but don't do, our dreams don't come true. You can pass this along to your friends and family, even if you don't apply it. When we believe but don't do, our dreams don't come true. Worse than that, if you are a Christian that knows and believes all the right things, but doesn't do anything with them, your faith becomes weak, frail, and fragile. Last time we began with the prequel episode of our brand new series, The Essentials, Ingredients of a Healthy Faith. And in that episode, we discovered that Jesus' goal for his followers was that they would be people with big, active, in the real world, in spite of faith. In other words, that his followers would live their lives at work and school, manage their relationships, their money, and health in such a way that flowed from their confidence in God and that would be lived out in the real world through actions and activity, doing things instead of just believing things. We learned last time that Jesus was amazed twice in the four Gospels, the written accounts of his life. Once when he met someone who had big, all-in confidence in him and acted on it, and the other when he met people who let their own jealousy and pride keep them from having confidence in him like that. The invitation of Jesus wasn't to believe, it was to follow. It was relational, active, and tangible. It was not mystical or ethereal or spiritual. It was gritty, epic, personal, and real. After the resurrection, Jesus' followers, the apostles, did what Jesus did, and they invited people to follow Jesus. Those who became Jesus' followers became a part of a community called the church. But then something happened to the church over time. The invitation got dumbed down and watered down. And maybe the invitations that you grew up with. It was the invitation to believe in Jesus. It was an invitation to believe true things about Jesus so that you could go to heaven when you die. Some of you grew up with this, and I was around a lot of this growing up. Have you noticed that believe in me is a lot easier than follow me? Believe in me is a lot safer than follow me. It's a lot less demanding, a lot less personal. But here's the problem. Believe in me leaves you exactly where you are, with no change required in your life. When you read the Gospels, you will discover that Jesus invited people to live their lives in a way that reflected their trust or their confidence in Him. Why in Him? We learned last time that Jesus wanted people to trust Him like they trust God because He came to earth to show us what God was really like. That Jesus is the perfect representation of God. He wanted us to trust Him because then we would be trusting in God like He really is and not like how we imagine Him to be or how we grew up thinking He was like. We learned that God is most honored by our living, breathing, death-defying, in spite of trust in Him, just like you are. You're most honored when you're running late and someone speaks up for you and says that even though that they know you and that even though you're not there and it looks like you might be irresponsible or flaky, that they trust you. And that there must be something happening that we just don't know yet. It honors you when they have that kind of confidence in you in those moments. Jesus taught this, and He modeled this, and He intentionally put His followers into uncomfortable and difficult situations where they were forced to trust Him. So Jesus did not invite His followers to believe ideas or philosophies. He invited people to follow Him, to wake up every morning asking this question of themselves, no matter what the circumstance. What would I do if I was confident that God was with me? What would I say? What would I avoid? Who would I talk to? And how would I work? Where would I go if I knew God was with me no matter what? Not the God that I imagine or grew up believing in, but the God who was revealed in Jesus. In this series, we are asking, what fuels the development of enduring faith? The kind of faith that shows up in the real world, the kind of confidence in God that doesn't need a constant flow of new experiences and outside energy to keep it alive. The kind of confidence in God that carries you through the challenges of life, from childhood to adulthood. The kind of faith that, that my mom has. That despite living with multiple myeloma cancer for the past 8 years, despite being on chemo for those 8 years, despite dozens of days and nights in emergency rooms dealing with the humiliating side effects of that treatment, despite 2 bone marrow transplants that forced her to live away from home in Seattle and in Houston for months at a time, despite almost dying many times, despite being trapped in the middle of a Category 4 hurricane, even though she's had congestive heart failure and pneumonia twice and sepsis twice, and despite a persistent bladder infection for the past 20 years that is resistant to almost every antibiotic that is more painful than the cancer and never goes away. Yet her confidence keeps her peaceful and happy. My mom has not given up on life. Instead, she fights to live well, focused on others, and doing everything she can to do good to people around her, to make a positive impact in their lives. How do you and I develop a faith like that? That's what we're talking about in this series. We're focusing on the 5 essentials for developing a faith like hers. When you talk to someone like my mom and you hear their stories, you'll hear these 5 essentials. These 5 essentials intersect with your life no matter what age or stage of life you're in. Maybe you're in middle school or a retirement home, young adult living on your own for the first time, or someone who's been married for 60 years. It's a faith that can guide you when you're overwhelmed with success and choices and options, and a faith that carries you when you face loss. Maybe the loss of your health or job, marriage, a child, loss of a dream. Today we focus on the first of those 5 essentials. The ingredients of a healthy faith. Believe it or not, when you talk to people like my mom, people who have confidence in God that endures over a lifetime, they will tell you about the time when they encountered practical teaching for the first time. Practical teaching is the first of the 5 essentials of a healthy faith. Practical teaching develops enduring faith because when our active faith intersects with God's faithfulness, our faith grows. When you trust God and do something that you aren't comfortable with, you encounter God on the other side of that trust. For example, when there is someone in your life who has hurt you and you're angry with them, Jesus teaches that you should forgive them immediately. And if there is someone who is angry and hurt with you, Jesus teaches that you are to go immediately to them and make peace with them. This is the practical teaching of Jesus. So, let's say that when you first hear the teaching of Jesus to forgive and make peace with others, your first response is to say no. You might even say something stronger than that. Then later, you get the invitation to follow his guidance again. This time you say, not yet. You don't want to trust Jesus and have confidence and have no confidence in him that doing what he says will be better than holding on to the anger and the hurt. Maybe holding on to it makes you feel more safe somehow. Maybe when you were raised, that's how everyone lived. Putting Jesus' teaching into practice makes you uncomfortable. You're not ready to trust him in that area yet. You'd rather trust yourself. But eventually, let's say, you decide to trust Jesus and step outside of your comfort zone and live differently. You forgive that person even though they don't deserve it. You do good to them instead. You go to someone who is hurt with you and you humble yourself and you take responsibility and you make restitution and you make peace. And in those moments and on the other side of that trust, you encounter the goodness of God. You learn that his way is the better way. You might have believed it in your mind, but had not experienced it in your life. As you trust Jesus and do what he says, your confidence in him grows because you've experienced what happens when you step out of your comfort zone and follow him. Why is this? Because your trust in God is like a muscle. If you don't use it, you're going to lose it. How do you exercise this trust in God muscle? You say, Jesus, I'm going to follow your teaching in this area of my life, even though I don't know how it's going to turn out, even though no one else would do this, even though I think it's crazy and the people who love me think it's crazy. I don't know what the outcome will be. I'm afraid that it's going to hurt. It's going to make me uncomfortable. And I just really don't want to do it. But I'll do what you say. Anyway, I'll follow your teaching and trust you instead of trusting myself. That is called faith. And that's what trusting God looks like. When you begin to live this way in more areas of your life, money, sex, school, work, relationships, health, you begin to encounter God in each area of your life. When you experience the goodness and faithfulness of God on the other side of doing what Jesus teaches, you experience God. Why? Because God is spirit, and you and I are not. God doesn't have a physical body or a physical voice, so you don't experience him in a physical way. You have a spirit that lives in a physical body and experiences a physical life within a physical world. So when you trust the teaching of Jesus by doing what he teaches, instead of trusting yourself, your faith grows. Your trust in God grows. And we learned last week that trust is the currency of a relationship. So when we say we want you to have a relationship with God, there are some of you who were raised to translate those words as, I should go to church gatherings, I should pray, I should sing worship songs, I should read the Bible daily, and I should just overall try to become a good person. Those are all good things, but instead, what we are actually saying is that we want you to trust God. Because when your trust in God grows, your relationship with God grows. So, How do you trust God more? Is it something that happens in prayer or in a worship experience? Prayer and worship are experiences that can help you make a decision to trust God, but deciding to trust God and actually trusting God are two totally different things. For example, have you ever joined a gym or purchased gym equipment or signed up for Weight Watchers or even any type of weight management system? Well, the decision to join a gym or buy the weights or the bike or sign up for the diet program, it's important. It's a great first step. But none of those things mean that you're on your way to getting in shape. In other words, you can have a gym membership, a nice set of weights, a Peloton in your home, and have all the latest supplements you need for your weight loss plan and your diet, and still not lose a single pound. In fact, you can have all those things and get in worse shape than before. Does that make sense? The decision you made during prayer and the things you said to God in worship, including the decision you made during that worship experience, was just that, a decision. This is important. When you trust God more than you trust yourself, that is when you experience God every day in your life. If you try to experience God through prayer and worship alone, you will always need some new and intense experience to make you feel like you are connecting with God. If you do not trust Jesus by following his teaching in your life, the new and emotional experience you have in worship and prayer, they will be new and they will be emotional, but they may not actually be an encounter with God. In the Gospels, we see Jesus constantly pushing his 12 apostles into uncomfortable circumstances. And they asking them to do things they couldn't do, they had never done before, and they weren't sure were going to work. And he did all that so that he could prove to them that he was trustworthy. Why? So that they would actually trust him. We see this in Jesus' teaching, especially in Jesus' most famous message. It was probably the content of his sermons every time he taught. The Sermon on the Mount is filled with shockingly practical teaching. It's in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 7. And in this teaching, Jesus introduces his upside-down kingdom ethic. The lifestyle that Jesus taught was the opposite of the lifestyle of his audience. See, Jesus lived in a world where the people with all the resources and all the power used them to make their own lives better, at the expense of the people without the resources and power. And in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus taught the upside down version of that view. He taught that people with power and with resources should use them to benefit those without them. This was a brand new idea in that world. It was revolutionary. He taught that they were to have open-ended generosity instead of a 10% or tithe mentality. Jesus taught that they should be the kind of people who had unlimited generosity, that they were to give to anyone who asks, that if someone asked you to go 1 mile, you should go 2 miles. Jesus said that they were to forgive no matter what the offense or how many times they were hurt. They were to forgive like God forgave them. He taught that before they judged someone else's flaws or lifestyle, they were to go to a mirror and look at their own lifestyle and look at their own flaws and fix them first, because only then would they be able to see clearly to help the other person fix their flaws. This was shockingly new and upside down for them. Jesus taught that it was impossible to be right with God and not be right with other people. They lived in a culture where they thought they could have peace with God even if they weren't at peace with other people. Jesus taught it wasn't that way at all. Everything in the Sermon on the Mount was so practical that it was scary. Jesus was inviting them to live in a different world. He was creating a new kind of world that was the complete opposite of this world. Jesus was saying, I am not simply inviting you to believe some things about me, but I'm inviting you to do life differently. Jesus' teaching was so challenging. Those of you who have embraced Jesus' practical teaching in your life, you know there is a reward on the other side. You've experienced the reality of God in your life. It's an unshakable kind of knowing too. The kind of knowing that goes beyond something you memorize or that just stays in your mind. It becomes part of your essence and who you are. It's made your life better. Do you remember when you first heard what Jesus was inviting you to do and how he wants you to live? Maybe you took notes and maybe you believed it and agreed with it, but to actually do it, you might have thought, that sounds good. I believe it, but I feel like if I do it, it puts me at risk. I feel like it makes me vulnerable. And I don't know how it's going to turn out. It could end badly. And then you heard your Heavenly Father say to you, trust me. Come on, trust me. You won't ever experience me until you trust me. Some of you have stopped experiencing the reality of God like you used to. You attend church and try to connect to Him in prayer and through scripture reading and maybe through worship experiences, and you don't sense the reality of God anymore. Maybe this is why you've walked away from faith or you feel like you've lost your faith. The way you experience the reality of God's presence in your life is when you trust Him by taking a risk and doing what He is asking you to do. You will experience the reality of God's presence in your life by following His invitation to give up your control and applying His teaching to your life. Are there hurts you hold on to because it's easier than forgiving and doing what's needed to make peace and move forward? Maybe hating and blaming is more comfortable. Maybe your pain and hurt has defined who you've become, the victim. Maybe you feel like if you no longer have that, then you're afraid and you won't know who you are anymore. Are there habits you refuse to surrender because they bring you some sense of security and even identity? You know they are destructive, but let's be honest, those habits meet a need in your life. If you leave those habits behind, maybe you're afraid that need won't be met. Are there some hang-ups you have in the way you think about yourself or how you view and treat certain types of people? And the idea of leaving those hang-ups behind makes you uncomfortable and insecure. You will not experience the reality of God's presence in your life until you trust Him by following His teaching, especially in the vulnerable areas of your hurts, your habits, and your hang-ups. When you do that, when you follow Him, you will be doing life differently. Let's get back to the story of Jesus' practical teaching. He makes a prediction about the future. He says, therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine, and he's talking about all of those, all the audience who was hearing His words, all of them who heard His words and believed them? Nope. Remembered them? Nope. Wrote them down? Nope. Agreed with them? Nope. Who felt convicted by them? That's it. Who felt bad about themselves and guilty because of His words? Nope. Unfortunately, that's about as far as most messages sometimes take us. Sometimes when we hear a teaching or a preacher that makes us feel bad about our behavior, really makes us feel guilty, we feel like we've had an encounter with God. Sometimes we're drawn to preachers like this because they actually make us feel intense emotion. And we think that that emotion is an encounter with God. We think, wow, that was so good. Man, that really got me and made me feel bad. Whoa. I'm not going to do anything with it, but I feel guiltier and worse about myself. And I know that the preacher is right and I know God is right, but I'm just going to continue to feel bad and come back next week so the preacher can beat up on us some more. We get confused and think that this is an encounter with God. This is very important. God wants you to do what He is asking you to do, to trust Him, even though it doesn't make sense to you and it's scary. And when you do, you will encounter Him on the other side of that trust. That's the encounter God wants you to have. So Jesus says, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice, everyone who hears my words and then does what I just taught, whoever does that is like a wise person. And a wise person is someone who understands that what they do today shapes who they become and what they experience tomorrow. A wise person is a doer instead of just a believer. He says, Someone who hears these words and puts them into practice is like a wise person who builds his house. Because building a house is like building a life, because you establish your life there. Your relationships, your money, your dreams, your plans. The essence of living is done in a house. He says it's like somebody who builds his house on the rock. This might be where many people stop tracking with Jesus in his teaching. Because today, if you have a piece of property that has a lot of rock, you need someone to come in with dynamite to blow some holes in that rock so you can pour concrete and rebar into a foundation and create footings to start building your house. But in Jesus' day, that's not how they did it. In that time, the most solid foundation for your home was solid rock. But the problem was that it was very labor intensive. It took a long time, and it was more expensive. Your neighbors might tell you that if you just move down the road a little bit, there's some nice soft sand and clay you can build your house on, because that's what they used to build their own house, and it was built and they had moved in no time. They might tell you that you're crazy to pound away and sweat at building your house on solid rock. Jesus was saying to his audience that if they were going to build their lives on his teaching, it's like building their lives on solid rock. It's going to be harder at first. It's going to take longer at first. It's going to cost more at first. Your neighbors might tell you to build your life on something else, something easier, quicker, something that doesn't cost as much. And what Jesus was teaching this, there was an unspoken question he just leaves floating in the air. Do you trust me? Do you trust me enough to do the hard thing, the time-consuming thing, and the costly thing, and follow my teaching? You might be wondering if it's worth it, and there is no way to know until later on. Will you follow me, not believe me or believe in me? Will you trust me when you don't know how this will turn out? That's the question for me, and that's the question for you. A question every day in the real world of our lives. Not do I believe, but do I trust? Then Jesus predicts the two possible futures for the people who are hearing his teaching. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, yet it did not fall, because it has its foundation on the rock. Jesus is making a prediction about the future of his hearers here. It was an illustration they understood, because in that part of the world, when there was a flash flood, if they didn't have a solid foundation, it would be a total loss. Having the right foundation sometimes was the difference between life and death, between surviving with something or losing it all. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. Jesus is saying someone who hears my words taught, writes them down, discusses them, tells others about them, and then comes back week after week to hear more of them, but does not do them or put them into practice is like a foolish person. Listen, if you tuned out for a second, come back. What Jesus is saying here has shocking implications for the average church person. In fact, if you don't like church people, you're going to love this part. Jesus is saying it is possible for you to watch my words on TV, to listen to them sung on the radio or Spotify or by your favorite Christian artists, to hear them explained every weekend in church, and for you to believe them and agree with them and yet live your life in a way that makes it all worthless to you. It's possible to hear, it's possible to believe, and yet live your life in a way that will set you up for a crisis of faith. Said a different way, believing can be deceiving. If you're not a Jesus follower or aren't anymore, this is probably where we as the church, we owe you an apology. Maybe the reason you aren't interested in Jesus or aren't anymore is not that you don't believe it. It's that you're not sure we really believe it. Because you've heard what we say and what we preach about when it comes to the Bible and God and truth and how much we value life. And then you look at the way we actually live our lives and how we really treat people, the ones who are already born. And you shake your head and you're not wrong. You know, Jesus' brother wrote something about this in a letter, and he's more direct. He says, "Do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves." If you think, James is saying here, that because you listen to Jesus' teaching and you agree with him, that you are okay, you are only fooling yourself. He's saying that if you're someone who makes it a point to listen to and values the words of Jesus, you are at risk for this kind of thinking. That somehow you are in a good place with God because you take the time to listen to watch online, to think about the words of Jesus every week. And that, if anything, you're at least better than the people who do not attend church or watch online or value the words of Jesus like you do. James is saying if you think this way, you are misleading yourself. He's saying that you are believing your own fake news. He says, don't merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says. There it is again. Do what it says. This is important. Listening to the words of Jesus and not doing them is actually bad for you because you are lying to yourself and believing that you are building your life on a solid foundation when you are not. He's saying that if you hear the words of Jesus and make a priority on listening to them, but never do what he says, you might be in a worse position than a person who never hears or places any value in the words of Jesus. Because at least they are being honest and not deceiving themselves. James gives this illustration. He says, okay, after you look in the mirror in the morning when you get out of bed and you say to yourself, I look terrible. I believe my face needs some work. I believe my teeth need some work and my hair needs some work and I believe my outfit needs some work. I think I would scare people if they saw me right now. In fact, I'm convinced of it. I'm absolutely sure. Would you, James uses this illustration, would you, without showering or getting ready, grab your keys, put on some slippers or flip-flops, and then go to work or school or out to run errands and visit people? Would you do that? Do you know why you wouldn't do that? Because when it comes to your physical appearance, you're not just a hearer, you're a doer. You don't just believe, but you take the information you get from the mirror and you apply what you know about looking better. You would rather be late for work or school or an appointment than to show up not looking good. Here's another prediction from Jesus about your future. He says if all you ever do is believe and you hear, but you never actually follow Jesus by doing what he teaches, then you are setting yourself up for a crisis of faith in the future. Because one day you're going to need an unshakable confidence in God, and it won't be there because you never developed it. You never built your life on trusting Jesus by doing what he said. So when that moment comes, when you need unshakable confidence in God, you won't be able to just pray it up or worship it up or teach it up. It's like a test at school. When the time comes, you either know it or you don't. It's like harvesting a crop. If you didn't plant anything, you can't just run out to the field and rush it or force something to grow. So Jesus is saying, come on, follow me, trust me, not in your head, but in the real world. Build your life on what I am teaching you. Do it so that you'll know me and you'll know your Father in heaven. So again, back to this practical teaching of Jesus, and his words get even stronger. He says, the rain came down, the streams rose, the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. They heard and valued the words of Jesus, but they never did anything with them. They didn't put them into practice because it was too hard. They wanted something quicker. It cost too much. And then the storm came, like it does for all of us. And there was a great crash. Maybe this is your story. Do you know how people who have heard the words of Jesus and never lived them out respond when the crash comes? They conclude there is no God. Or if there is a God, he didn't really come through for me. He wasn't there when I needed him. Why do they blame God? Because although they believed, their faith was feeble, frail, and fragile. They heard and they believed, but they never exercised that faith muscle. They didn't trust Jesus enough to begin living like he taught. So their faith wasn't ready to handle the inevitable storms of life. If you neglect developing your confidence in God by not having the courage to live your life like Jesus taught, you will miss out. You'll miss the opportunity to grow your faith in preparation for whatever the future holds for you. You will miss out on knowing the love and faithfulness of God as a reality in your life. For you, the grace and goodness of God will just be comforting words in a quote or lyrics in a song. You'll miss out on knowing what it's like to be wrapped in them, carried by them, and surrounded by them, even in the darkest moments of your life. If you decide to hear but not do what Jesus taught, when the inevitable crash comes, you might decide, like so many do, to blame God and walk away from faith. For a while, your life without faith might be a relief. Because building your house on sand is always easier, it's always quicker, and it's always cheaper. But then, the storms of life will come like they do for all of us. And they will expose what we've all been building our life on. You'll find in life that the people who have enduring faith, an unshakable confidence in God, have been exercising their faith muscle for years. Their trust is in God. That's why the teaching of Jesus is the guide for how they live each day. This is important. The teaching of Jesus is sometimes going to cause you some tension. You might be sensing that tension right now. This is because Jesus isn't just inviting you to agree with something or to believe in something. He's inviting you to live differently. You will feel yourself resisting it sometimes. I feel it that same way sometimes. And I'll be talking and you'll be arguing with me in your mind as I talk, just so that you don't have to do anything with what I'm saying. Just like Jesus' first century audiences did. Why? Because that's the way we're wired as humans. But Jesus is inviting you to a new and different way of life. It's an upside down way of living compared to how the rest of our culture lives. Jesus is saying, trust me. That's the issue. Do you trust Jesus more than anyone else? When I ask if you want to give your life to Jesus, I'm asking if you want to trust him enough to make the decision to apply his teaching to your life. So the first essential ingredient of a healthy faith is practical teaching. It's what you need to develop and grow enduring faith, like my mom, and like everyone who has the kind of gritty, epic confidence in God that lasts a lifetime. Practical teaching doesn't just encourage us to sit and listen and believe. It doesn't encourage us just to experience something, but to do something, because that's the only kind of faith that has any value. So do you know what to do with what you are hearing? If not, this is where you begin. Following Jesus is not just about being a nice person. It's about being full of the kind of faith we talked about today. In other words, being faithful. Following Jesus is going to stretch you and grow you, and ultimately, following Jesus will make your life better and will make you better at life. I bet you know people like that, like my mom. So why don't we just become people like that? Wouldn't the world be better with more people like that? Wouldn't your family and your school and your workplace be better with more people like that? Wouldn't our communities be better? So instead of just believing true things, let's do what Jesus taught. Let's trust him instead of whoever or whatever else you find yourself following. In other words, let's follow Jesus. Don't miss next time when we'll talk about the second essential to our enduring faith in part 3 of the Essentials.
Before I spoke a word, you were singing over me. For you have been so, so good to me. For I took a breath, you breathed your life in me. Yes, you did. For you have been so, so kind to me. And all the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. And oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. I couldn't earn it, I don't deserve it, but still you gave yourself away. And all the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of When I was your foe, still your love fought for me. Sing from the heart. For you have been so, so good to me. When I felt no worth, you paid it all for me. For you have been so, so kind to me. And all the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. love is worth it. Every moment with you, yeah. Your love is perfect. Your love is worth it. All you've done and will do. Sing it with me. Your love is perfect. Your love is worth it. Every moment with you, my King. Your love is perfect. Your love is worth it. All you've done and will do. Come on. Your love is perfect. Your love is worth it.